Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found a job on the dark web to work as a nurse. Last night, I saw something strange on the ER's security camera. So, I'm not usually the kind of person to share stuff like this, but honestly, I feel like I need to get it out there. I just want to see if anyone else has gone through something similar. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe it's just, I don't know, weird coincidence? But I don't think so. Something's wrong, and I'm starting to freak out. Okay, here's the backstory. About 2 months ago, I was going through a rough patch. I'm a registered nurse, and after the pandemic, I was burnt out, like really burnt out. The long hours, the constant pressure, the feeling that I was just this cog in a broken system. It all got to me. So, I quit. No real plan, no backup savings, just sheer exhaustion. I thought I could maybe take a break and figure things out later. Well, turns out later came faster than I expected. My savings dried up quicker than I thought they would, and finding a new job wasn't as easy as I hoped. I was desperate, scrolling through every job board and website I could think of, when I stumbled on this forum that was different. It wasn't your typical job board. It was part of this deep web thread, something I definitely shouldn't have been poking around in. But there it was, an anonymous post offering high pay for medical professionals willing to work unusual hours. No interview, no references required, and the pay was way more than what I was getting at my old hospital. It sounded sketchy as hell, but I was desperate. The message said something like, "We need nurses as soon as possible. Short shifts. No questions asked. Discretion required." Looking back now, that phrase, "no questions asked," should have been a red flag. But I didn't have the luxury to be picky. I clicked the link they provided, and it took me to this super minimalistic website, almost like someone threw it together in 5 minutes. There was just a single form to fill out: name, contact info, and credentials. I hesitated, then filled it out. I didn't hear anything for about a week, and honestly, I thought that was the end of it. Maybe it was some scam or just a dead lead. Then, out of nowhere, I got an email. There wasn't much to it, just a brief message telling me I was hired, and instructions to report to the small ER on the outskirts of town. Now, I'd never heard of this ER before. It wasn't part of any hospital system I recognized, and when I tried Googling it, I found nothing. Not a single review, not even a listing. Weird, right? But the email was clear. If I didn't show up, I wouldn't get paid, and I needed that money. So I went. The place was strange. It wasn't like any ER I'd ever worked in before. For starters, it was tiny, more like a glorified clinic with a couple of patient rooms. It didn't have the usual hustle and chaos of an emergency room either. It was dead quiet, except for the occasional beep from a heart monitor or the hum of old fluorescent lights. There was no receptionist, no visible doctors, just me and a couple of other nurses who barely spoke a word to each other. The shifts were short, just like they promised. 8 hours, and I was free to go. My job mostly involved basic stuff: checking vitals, monitoring patients, and making sure supplies were stocked. Honestly, the patients that did come in were few and far between, which I thought was strange for an ER. But the money was good, and nobody bothered me, so I tried not to question it too much. I thought things were going smoothly until last night. That's when things got weird. My shift started at 10 p.m., just like usual. The first few hours were uneventful. No patients came in, and the other nurses didn't say much to me. Around 2 a.m., I was in the break room, sipping on some stale coffee and mindlessly scrolling through my phone. We had a few security cameras scattered around the building, one in the hallway, one near the entrance, and one in the back where the ambulance bay is. We're supposed to check them periodically, but honestly, most of us don't. I hadn't even thought about them until the screen on the break room wall flickered. I glanced up, and something caught my eye on the camera feed. It was the one pointed at the entrance. At first, I thought maybe it was just static or a bug crawling on the lens, but then I realized there was a figure just standing there. It wasn't clear, more like a shadow, a silhouette, but it was definitely a person. They were just outside the entrance, standing completely still, facing the door. Weird, right? People come into ERs all the time, but they don't usually just stand there. I figured maybe they were drunk or in shock or something. I put down my coffee and walked over to the entrance. It was one of those automatic sliding doors, the kind that opens when you get close. But as I approached, the doors didn't open. I looked out into the parking lot, expecting to see someone standing there, but no one was there. The parking lot was empty. I went back to the break room and checked the camera again. This time, the figure was gone. Nothing. Just the still image of the entrance. The same flickering lights. The same empty parking lot. I figured maybe it was some glitch in the camera, or my eyes playing tricks on me because of how late it was. So, I shrugged it off and went back to my coffee. But that wasn't the last of it. Something else happened later that night. Something I can't really explain. And if you're thinking this sounds like some low-budget horror movie right now, trust me, I wish it was. Because what I saw on that camera later, well, that's when I realized something was seriously wrong with this place. Okay, I'm going to take a breather for now, but if anyone's interested, I'll post what happened next. It's messed up, but I need to get this off my chest. I just hope I'm not going crazy. I couldn't shake off the weird feeling from that night. The shadow at the entrance, the glitchy camera. Something about it made my skin crawl, but I convinced myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, maybe. After all, weird stuff happens during night shifts. I've seen patients hallucinate entire conversations with people who weren't there, watched machines go haywire for no reason, so I wasn't going to let a shadow freak me out. That's what I told myself anyway. But the rest of the night, it got worse. After I saw that figure outside, I was a little on edge, so I kept checking the cameras. Nothing out of the ordinary showed up for the next hour or so, and I started to calm down. Around 3 a.m., I decided to make my rounds, checking the supply closets, tidying up patient rooms, basic stuff to kill time. As I made my way down the hall, I noticed how quiet it was. Like, too quiet. If you've ever worked in a hospital, you know there's always some kind of noise. Beeping monitors, nurses chatting, the distant sound of a stretcher being wheeled down the corridor. But here, it was dead silent. No other nurses, no patients. Just the sound of my footsteps echoing against the cold tile floor. When I reached the last room, I stopped. The door was closed, which was weird because we usually leave them open unless there's a patient inside. There hadn't been any new admissions that night, so I knew it should have been empty. I stood there for a second, staring at the door, thinking I must have forgotten something. Maybe someone brought a patient in and I hadn't noticed. I was tired. so I figured I could have missed it. I pushed the door open, and that's when I saw him. There was a man sitting on the bed, dressed in one of those pale hospital gowns. His head was down, chin almost touching his chest, so I couldn't see his face. At first, I thought he was asleep, but there was something about the way he was sitting, so rigid and stiff, that made me uneasy. "Sir?" I said, stepping closer. "Are you all right?" No response. I reached for the chart at the foot of the bed, but there wasn't one. In fact, there was no indication that anyone had even been admitted to that room. I glanced back at him. He hadn't moved. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, like he was barely alive. I felt this chill creeping up my spine, that same feeling you get when someone's standing just a little too close behind you. I don't know how to explain it, but every instinct in me was screaming to get out of that room. But I couldn't just leave a patient like that, right? Even if something felt off, it was still my job to help. I hesitated, then reached out to gently shake his shoulder. "Sir," I said again, trying to keep my voice steady. The moment my hand touched his skin, he jerked violently, his whole body convulsing like he was having a seizure. His head snapped up, and that's when I saw his face. Or rather, what was left of it. His eyes were gone, just these hollow, black sockets. His skin was gray and blotchy, sagging in places like it had started to decompose. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, and for a split second, I thought I heard this faint, raspy whisper, like he was trying to speak, but couldn't form the words. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, as I scrambled for the door. I slammed it shut behind me and bolted down the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I stopped at the nurse's station, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing with 1,000 questions. Who was that guy? How did he even get into that room? And more importantly, what the hell was wrong with him? I looked around, expecting to see one of the other nurses or staff members, but the place was completely deserted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like something or someone was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. Trying to calm down, I went back to the break room to check the cameras again. I needed to know if anyone had brought that guy in, or if he'd just appeared out of nowhere. The screen flickered as I cycled through the different feeds. Hallway, empty. Ambulance bay, empty. Entrance, empty. Then I switched to the camera outside the room I'd just been in. My stomach dropped. There he was, standing in the hallway. The same man from the patient room, his face still that horrifying, vacant mask. He wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, facing the camera as if he knew I was watching him. I blinked, my heart racing. When I looked back at the screen, the feed glitched, and for a second, he was gone. But then it corrected itself, and he was closer. Not walking, not running, just closer, like he'd teleported a few feet forward. The feed glitched again, and now he was right outside the break room door. I swear, I felt my blood turn to ice. I jumped up and ran to the door, expecting to see him standing there. But when I opened it, nothing, just an empty hallway. I was shaking. I knew what I'd seen on that screen. He was there, right outside this room. I couldn't explain it, but there was no way it was a hallucination. My hands were slick with sweat as I slammed the door shut again and locked it. I didn't know what to do at that point. I was too terrified to leave the break room, but staying in there made me feel like a trapped animal. I kept my eyes glued to the camera feed, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. It was just me, alone in that ER, watching the flickering security monitors. Eventually, my shift ended. I was so shaken that I didn't even bother clocking out. I just grabbed my stuff and bolted for the exit, my head on a swivel the whole time. When I got to my car, I sat there for a long time, just trying to process what I'd seen. I don't know if I imagined it, if it was some kind of stress-induced hallucination from all the weird hours and lack of sleep, but it felt real. Too real. And the worst part? When I drove past the ER this morning, it wasn't there. Like, the whole building was just gone. I don't know what's going on, but I have a really bad feeling about it. And something tells me this isn't over. I didn't sleep after that shift. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, the man from the camera. Those hollow eyes, the way his body twitched when I touched him, and how he just appeared outside the break room, like he knew I was watching. It was like a movie I couldn't turn off, replaying in my mind over and over. I spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But the worst part wasn't what I'd seen inside the ER. It was the fact that the ER wasn't there anymore. After my shift, when I drove back past the building, I expected to see the flickering lights, the dull glow of the emergency sign above the door, something that told me I hadn't just spent the last 8 hours in some bizarre fever dream, but instead, all I saw was this empty lot. Like the building had never existed. I sat there in my car for at least 20 minutes, engine idling, just staring at the spot where the ER should have been. It wasn't like it had been torn down or abandoned. It was just gone. There was nothing but a cracked, overgrown parking lot and a few scattered pieces of trash blowing in the wind. No sign of a building, no sign that anyone had ever worked there. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't. I checked my phone, scrolled back through my messages. The email from the job offer was still there. It wasn't a dream. The shifts I'd worked, the patients I'd seen, that thing I saw on the camera, it all happened. I had proof in my phone, in my memory. So why was the ER gone? I wasn't thinking straight. I needed answers, but I had no idea where to start. I figured maybe the other nurses, the ones who worked there with me, could help explain things. But there was a problem. I didn't know their names. We never talked, never exchanged numbers, and it wasn't like they had name tags or anything. They just existed during the shifts, silently going about their tasks. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it seemed more than a little suspicious. I needed to talk to someone, anyone who might know something about that place. So, I decided to go back to the thread where I'd originally found the job. I pulled up my laptop, heart racing, and started searching. But here's the thing. I couldn't find the thread anymore. It was like it had vanished from the deep web, just like the ER itself. I checked my browsing history, even tried some of the sketchier forums to see if anyone had posted anything similar, but it was like the entire conversation had been wiped from existence. At this point, I was spiraling. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little sense any of it made. How had I worked shifts at a place that didn't exist? Where did those patients come from? And most of all, what was that thing I saw? I was getting desperate for answers, so I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went back to the empty lot. I didn't want to, but it felt like the only way to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. It was late in the afternoon when I got there. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. I parked my car and just sat there for a while, staring at the empty space where the ER used to be. I could feel my pulse thudding in my neck, that familiar sense of dread creeping in. I finally worked up the nerve to get out of the car and walk toward the lot. My footsteps echoed off the ground as I approached the spot where the entrance had been, the place where I'd seen that shadowy figure standing just the night before. I half expected something, anything, to happen. Maybe the building would reappear, or maybe I'd find some kind of clue that would explain everything. But no, it was just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and cracked pavement. There was nothing there, or so I thought. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye near the edge of the lot, half hidden in the tall grass. It was a small black rectangle, something metallic glinting in the fading light. I walked over and crouched down, brushing the grass aside, and froze when I saw what it was. It was a security camera, the same kind that had been in the ER. I stared at it for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. It was just sitting there, broken off at the base like someone had ripped it out of the wall and tossed it aside. There was no way it should have been there, not in an empty lot where a building had never existed, according to anyone else. But there it was, a piece of the ER left behind like some kind of twisted reminder that I hadn't imagined at all. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The lens was cracked and the wires were frayed, but it was unmistakably from the ER. I could feel the panic rising in my chest again, my breath quickening. This didn't make any sense. None of it made sense. I stood up and backed away from the lot, the camera still clutched in my hands. I didn't know what to do, where to go, who to talk to. All I knew was that something was very, very wrong. I was about to leave when I heard it. A low, distant hum, almost like a generator starting up. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the wind, but it grew louder. I spun around, scanning the lot, trying to figure out where it was coming from. My heart was pounding in my ears as the sound grew closer, more distinct. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the lot, where the weeds were thickest, the air seemed to shimmer, like heat rising off the pavement on a hot day. But it wasn't just heat. The shimmer started to take shape, warping and bending like something was pushing through from the other side. My brain was screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my body wouldn't listen. I just stood there, paralyzed, as the shimmer coalesced into a shadowy figure. It was the man, the same man from the ER, from the cameras, standing at the far edge of the lot. His face was just as blank, just as hollow, those empty sockets staring straight at me. But this time, he wasn't just standing there. He was moving. Slowly, methodically, he started walking toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My body was locked in place, my mind screaming in terror as he got closer, step by step, his footsteps echoing in the silence. And then, he stopped. Right in the center of the lot, he stopped and smiled. It wasn't a normal smile, though. It was wrong, like someone had taken a picture of a smile and stretched it over his face. It didn't reach his eyes, those hollow black sockets where his eyes should have been. The humming grew louder, and the air around him shimmered again. In an instant, he was gone, like he'd never been there at all. The lot was empty again, silent, except for the faint sound of my ragged breathing. I didn't stick around after that. I ran to my car and got the hell out of there, the broken security camera still clutched in my hands. Now I'm back home, sitting in the dark with this stupid camera on the table in front of me, and I have no idea what to do next. All I know is that whatever this is, it's not just a glitch in the cameras or my imagination playing tricks on me. Something is out there, and it's watching me. After I got home, I locked every door and window in my apartment. I'm not usually paranoid, but after seeing that man again, the one from the ER, the one who shouldn't even exist, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. It was like a dark cloud had settled over me, and no matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. I sat in my living room, the broken security camera resting on the coffee table, just staring at it. My phone sat next to me, buzzing with notifications that I ignored. I felt like I was losing my mind. I mean, how do you even explain something like this? An ER that disappears, a man who somehow moves through cameras, and now, this? I had no one to talk to, no way to explain what I'd seen without sounding completely insane. But I couldn't just let it go. There had to be some explanation. Maybe I'd find something on the camera. I don't know why I thought I'd be able to make sense of any of this. The camera was broken, its lens was shattered, and the wires hung limply out of the back, like the guts of a dead animal. But I still felt this weird pull toward it, like it was the only thing left connecting me to whatever the hell was happening. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my laptop, sat on the floor, and hooked the camera up. It took some jerry-rigging, and I'm no tech genius, but I managed to splice the wires enough to get a connection. When the camera's power light flickered on, I almost dropped it. It shouldn't have worked. Not after everything it had been through, but the light was glowing a soft, eerie green, like it was waiting for me. I opened up a video feed on my laptop, hoping, praying that I might catch something, anything. For the first few minutes, the screen stayed black, just static. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, waiting for something to happen. I could hear the low hum of the laptop's fan, the ticking of the clock on my wall. But that was it. No weird sounds, no voices, just nothing. Then, the screen glitched. It was subtle at first, a small flicker that lasted less than a second. But then it happened again, this time longer. The black screen flashed, and for the briefest moment, an image appeared. My heart raced as I paused the feed and rewound it, slowing the playback. When I hit play again, I froze. It was the ER. The screen showed one of the hallways, the exact same hallway I'd walked down during my shift. The flickering fluorescent lights, the dingy walls, the cracked floor tiles, all of it. It was like I was there again, but it wasn't a live feed. The timestamp in the corner said it was from last night, during my shift. I watched as the camera panned down the hall, moving on its own, like someone was controlling it. But I was alone during that shift. No one had touched the cameras. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light, the door to the last patient room opened slowly. My chest tightened as I watched the door creak open, the shadows inside spilling out into the hall. I already knew what I was going to see, but that didn't stop the wave of dread that hit me when the figure stepped out of the room. It was him, the same man, the one I'd seen sitting on the bed. He stepped out into the hallway, moving with that same unnatural stiffness, his head tilted slightly to the side, like he was listening for something. The camera zoomed in on him as he started walking down the hall, toward the break room, toward me. The timestamp kept ticking, and my breath caught in my throat as I realized that this wasn't just any random footage. This was the moment from last night, the moment I saw him on the security feed. I watched in horror as the man got closer and closer to the break room door, his head snapping up like he knew exactly where the camera was. And then, just like before, the feed glitched and he was gone. But this time, the screen didn't go black. Instead, the camera feed cut to static for a few seconds before something new appeared on the screen, something I hadn't seen last night. A single message written in what looked like distorted, glitchy text. "You shouldn't have come back." My heart stopped. I stared at the words on the screen, my brain racing, trying to make sense of it. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a threat. I rewound the footage again, trying to figure out how it got there, but the message stayed, burned into the screen like a scar. It was as if someone, or something, was talking directly to me. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up as the message lingered, the distorted letters flickering, almost pulsing, and then the feed cut out entirely. My laptop screen went black, and I was left sitting there in the dark, heart pounding, mind racing. I couldn't explain what I'd just seen, but it was real. I wasn't imagining it. There was something in that ER, something that knew I'd been there and knew I'd tried to go back. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the coffee table, the sound breaking through the silence like a gunshot. I jumped, fumbling to grab it. When I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. It was a new email, from the same address that had hired me in the first place. The subject line was blank, but when I opened it, my blood ran cold. There was no message, just a single attachment. It was a video file. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it, half of me wanting to see what it was, the other half wanting to throw my phone across the room and forget this was all happening. The video opened and my heart nearly stopped. It was me, sitting in my living room, right now, the exact same moment. The camera angle was from behind me, like someone was standing in the corner of the room, watching me as I watched the video. I whipped around, my pulse spiking, but no one was there. The room was empty, but when I turned back to the screen, the video showed something else. In the corner of the room, where no one had been standing a second ago, the man from the ER was there, just barely visible in the shadow. His hollow eyes were fixed on me, that grotesque, stretched smile twisting across his face. He was watching me. The video ended with a single frame, a close-up of his face, those black, empty sockets staring straight into the camera. And beneath it, in the same glitchy text as before, was another message. "I'm not done yet." I dropped the phone, my body going numb, as the words sunk in. My mind was screaming at me to leave, to run, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed with fear, as the room seemed to close in around me. I wasn't alone. I could feel him. Somewhere, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, he was waiting. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was the fear, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was just the twisted need to understand what the hell was happening. But after that last message, after seeing him standing in my living room, on that video, I made a decision I can't fully explain. I went back. I told myself I'd never step foot near that place again. The ER was gone, erased from the world, and I should have left it that way. But something about that final message, "I'm not done yet," made me feel like there was no escape. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. He wasn't finished with me. No matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, he'd find me. So, I decided to face it. Maybe I thought confronting him, or whatever it was, would end this nightmare. Maybe I hoped that if I went back, I could find something, anything, that would make it all stop. I waited until nightfall, packed a flashlight, and drove out to the empty lot where the ER had once stood. The roads were deserted, the sky overcast, making everything feel suffocatingly dark. As I pulled up to the lot, I saw the same cracked pavement, the same overgrown weeds, and the same oppressive silence. But something was different this time. The air felt thicker, like the atmosphere itself had shifted. There was a low hum in the distance, almost like the faint sound of an engine idling. But there were no cars, no machines, just that steady, unsettling hum. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, the flashlight gripped tightly in my shaking hands. I walked toward the center of the lot, where I'd found the camera before. My heart was racing, every instinct telling me to turn around, get back in the car, and drive away. But I couldn't. I was already too deep into this. I reached the spot, right where the ER's entrance had been. My breath was coming in shallow gasps now, the sound of it unnervingly loud in the dead quiet of the night. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, just like before, the air shimmered. I took a step back, heart hammering in my chest as the lot seemed to warp and bend, like reality itself was unraveling in front of me. The shimmer intensified, and slowly, impossibly, the ER began to reappear. The walls, the flickering lights, the glass doors, everything. It materialized like a mirage, solidifying before my eyes until it looked as real as it had the first time I'd stepped inside. But this time, something was off. The lights were dimmer, flickering in and out like they were struggling to stay on. The windows were cracked, and the air smelled stale, like the inside of a long-abandoned building. The hum had grown louder now, vibrating in my skull, and I could feel it in my bones, deep and unsettling. I stood there frozen in place, staring at the entrance, and then, without even thinking, I stepped forward. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, just like they had before. I could feel the cold air wash over me as I crossed the threshold, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The building was exactly the same as I remembered, but there was something wrong with it. The walls seemed darker, the floors dirtier, and everything felt off, like the entire place was decaying, rotting from the inside out. I made my way down the hall, the flashlight beam cutting through the thick shadows. The familiar sound of buzzing fluorescent lights filled the silence, but there was no sign of life, no patients, no nurses, nothing, just me and him. I knew he was here. I could feel his presence, that same suffocating sense of being watched. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I kept going, one foot in front of the other, until I reached the door at the end of the hall, the same door where I'd found him sitting on that bed, his empty eyes staring into nothing. The door was ajar. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. The room was empty. No bed, no monitors, no man, just darkness. But there was something else. On the far wall, where the bed should have been, there was writing, scrawled in what looked like black ink, or maybe something darker, were the same distorted letters I'd seen on the security camera, the same words that haunted me. You shouldn't have come back. My stomach twisted as I stepped further into the room, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I scanned the walls. The writing covered everything, from floor to ceiling. It was the same message, over and over, like some deranged mantra. You shouldn't have come back. I backed up toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest, when I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. I'm right here. I whipped around, the flashlight flickering, and saw him. The man, standing in the doorway, blocking my exit. His face was the same grotesque mask of decay, gray skin stretched too tight, hollow black sockets where his eyes should have been. But this time, his smile was wider, more twisted, and his body was shaking, not like a tremor, but like something barely holding itself together, like he was coming apart at the seams. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering wildly as the room seemed to warp around me, the walls bending in and out of focus. The writing on the walls seemed to bleed, dripping down onto the floor in thick black rivulets. And then he spoke. You never should have come back. His voice wasn't human. It was layered, distorted, like a dozen voices speaking at once, each one more twisted than the last. My legs felt like jelly as I backed up against the far wall, the man slowly advancing toward me, his smile growing impossibly wide. The air around me grew colder, the lights flickering in and out, and the sound, the hum, grew deafening. It filled my ears, my head, my entire body, until it felt like my bones were vibrating with it. I had nowhere to go. And then, just as his outstretched hand reached for me, everything stopped. The lights flickered one last time and went out completely. The hum died, and the air went still. I blinked, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I realized the man was gone. The room was empty. The writing on the walls faded, like it had never been there at all. I staggered out into the hallway, my flashlight still flickering in my hand. The ER was silent, completely still, like nothing had ever happened. I didn't wait to find out if he was coming back. I ran. I don't remember driving home. My mind was a blur, my body running on autopilot, but somehow I made it back. I locked myself in my apartment, every light on, and I've been sitting here ever since, trying to make sense of what happened. But the truth is, I don't think I'll ever understand it. That ER, that thing, whatever it is, it's not bound by the same rules as the rest of us. It's something else, something older, darker, that exists just beyond the edges of what we can see. And I'm terrified, because I don't think it's done with me yet. There's been no more messages, no more videos, but I can still feel it. That presence, lingering in the corners of my mind, waiting. I don't know how long I have before it comes back, but I know one thing for sure. This isn't over. Not yet. I should have died 10 years ago. I have a dark web murderer to thank for my life. Alright, so I know how this is gonna sound, but hear me out. I'm only alive today because a serial killer from the dark web saved me. I know that's not the kind of thing you expect to hear, especially on a normal day. But trust me, if you had gone through what I did, you'd understand. This all happened about 10 years ago, back when I was fresh out of high school, and like a lot of 18-year-olds, I was curious about the world, especially the parts I wasn't supposed to see. The thing is, I wasn't some tech genius or hacker. I was just a regular kid with way too much time on my hands. My friends and I would stay up late, watching conspiracy videos, weird YouTube clips, and of course, all the horror stories we could find. That's how we stumbled onto the dark web. It started off harmless, just us being stupid kids, joking about finding hitmen for hire. or browsing through creepy old forums. Honestly, we didn't even know what we were doing most of the time. We used Tor, the browser that lets you access the dark web, for those who don't know, like it was some kind of game. It didn't feel real. Nothing on there felt real. That is, until one night, something changed. I was on a call with my buddy Mike when we decided to explore this new site that he found. It had no name, just a string of random characters as the URL. Weird, right? But that's kinda normal for the dark web. The homepage was simple. Plain white text on a black background with a chat box at the bottom. Above it, there was a message. Are you ready to see what really matters? Enter your email to continue. Mike thought it was hilarious. He was egging me on, daring me to put in my email. Dude, come on. What's the worst that could happen? Spam? I hesitated. I mean, I'd seen enough of these dark web stories to know it usually doesn't end well, but I figured we were just messing around. So I typed in my burner email, the one I used for junk mail, and hit enter. Immediately, the screen glitched. I'm talking full-on static, like an old TV. My heart jumped, but it was late, and my brain wasn't firing on all cylinders, so I just laughed it off. Then, a message popped up in the chat box. Welcome, we've been waiting for you. My email address. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I mean, the email thing wasn't a huge deal, right? But something about the tone of that message was off. It felt personal, like someone was watching. Mike laughed it off, telling me I was just being paranoid, but I wasn't so sure. Before I could respond, the screen went black, and then the doorbell rang. At 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, hearing your doorbell ring isn't exactly normal, especially when you live in a small town where nothing happens. I froze. There was no way anyone could have known I was on that site, let alone found me that fast, right? But there it was, again, ding dong, clear as day. Mike, still on the call, heard it too. Dude, what the hell? Is someone at your door? Yeah, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not opening it. My heart was pounding, but I crept toward the door anyway, keeping the chain on as I cracked it open just enough to peek outside. There was no one there. The porch light flickered slightly in the cool night air, and everything looked normal. The empty street, the rows of quiet houses, it was like nothing had changed. Still, something felt horribly wrong. Then I saw it. A small black envelope lying on my doorstep. No markings, no name, just black. I quickly shut the door and locked it, leaning against the wood, as if that would keep whatever weirdness was outside from getting in. Mike was still talking in my ear, freaking out just as much as I was. Dude, what is it? What's out there? I picked up the envelope, my hand trembling slightly. It's just an envelope. What? No way. Who the hell leaves an envelope at your house at 2 a.m? I didn't have an answer. I stared at the thing, debating whether I should open it or just toss it in the trash. But of course, curiosity got the better of me. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in neat, typewritten font. It said, "You've been chosen. Come alone. Midnight. Don't be late." No address, no location, just those cryptic words. I showed the letter to Mike over the webcam. He was freaked out too, but tried to laugh it off like it was some kind of prank. Still, the timing was too perfect. How had this letter appeared on my doorstep minutes after entering my email on that site? It didn't make any sense. Mike was trying to calm me down, but I could barely hear him. My mind was racing. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Then, the doorbell rang again. This time, I didn't open the door. I just stood there, staring at it, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I mustered up the courage to check outside again. This time, there was no envelope, no mysterious package, just nothing. But that didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made everything worse. I went back to my computer, but the website was gone. The URL no longer worked, like it had vanished into thin air. Mike and I spent the next hour trying to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. The email, the doorbell, the letter, it all felt too real to be some random prank. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel something or someone just outside my window, watching. I kept thinking about that letter, the way it felt cold in my hands, like it had been left there by someone who wasn't supposed to exist. But nothing made sense. No one knew I'd been on that site. Hell, I didn't even know where I'd ended up myself. How could they find me? The next morning, things seemed a little more normal, like the whole thing had been some weird nightmare. Mike texted me early, asking if I was still alive and cracking jokes about how I had a dark web stalker. I tried to brush it off, tried to laugh it away, but I couldn't shake that sinking feeling in my gut. Something was wrong, and I didn't know how deep I was in yet. That's when I noticed it. The black van. I wouldn't have paid much attention to it, but it was parked across the street from my house. Not directly in front, but just far enough to be inconspicuous, like it was trying to blend in. But it didn't belong. My neighborhood is one of those quiet places where you know the cars, the people, even the weird dog that barks at anything that moves. This van, never seen it before. At first, I figured it was a delivery or maybe someone visiting a neighbor, but it didn't leave. I went about my day, keeping an eye on it, hoping it would just drive off. It didn't. I spent the whole day feeling that creeping unease, knowing that something wasn't right, but unable to prove it. Later that evening, I was in my room, scrolling mindlessly through Reddit, trying to distract myself when I heard something, a soft knock. Not on the door this time, but on the window. My blood turned to ice. I live on the second floor. I stood still, heart racing, listening for the sound again, praying it was just my imagination. But there it was. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, deliberate, like someone was testing to see if I was paying attention. I didn't want to look. Every horror movie instinct screamed at me not to look, but my body betrayed me. I crept toward the window, my breath shallow, and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out. There was no one there. I felt my pulse in my throat, almost choking me. The street was empty, the van still parked across the road, and yet, someone had knocked. I backed away from the window, my hand trembling. Was I going crazy? Was this just paranoia messing with me? Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're not alone. Midnight." I dropped my phone like it was a live grenade. My skin felt like it was crawling, like I was being watched from every angle. I snatched up my phone again, staring at the message, my mind racing. How did they have my number? Was this connected to the email, the van, the letter? I didn't know what to do, but my instincts told me to call Mike. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing it. The phone rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Mike was always glued to his phone. No way he'd ignore me. I felt that familiar cold chill creep up my spine. Then the text came again. Midnight. Don't be late. I couldn't breathe. I looked at the clock. It was 11:45 p.m. A part of me thought about running. I could grab my keys, jump in the car, and just drive. But where? What was I even running from? A text, a knock on the window, a creepy van. None of it made sense. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going anywhere near my front door at midnight. Seconds felt like hours as I sat in my room, staring at the door, at the window, waiting for something to happen. The van was still there, a shadow in the distance, and I could almost swear I saw movement inside. A silhouette? Someone shifting in the driver's seat? I couldn't tell. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. I stayed up all night, too wired to sleep, constantly checking my phone, my window, the van. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing again. This time, it was Mike. He didn't sound right. His voice was shaky, almost breathless. Dude, something's wrong. You need to come over. Now. Mike, what the hell? What's going on? I don't know, man. I don't know. Just get here. Please. That wasn't like him. Mike never asked for help. Ever. I grabbed my keys and headed out, heart still racing from the night before. As I walked out the door, I noticed something strange. The van? It was gone, just disappeared, like it had never been there at all. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It felt more like the calm before a storm. I drove to Mike's place as fast as I could. The roads were empty, and the eerie quiet of the night settled over me like a suffocating blanket. By the time I pulled up to his house, I could already tell something was off. His front door was slightly open, and there were no lights on inside. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the open door. Every bone in my body was telling me to turn around, to get back in my car, and leave. But this was Mike. I couldn't just leave him hanging. I stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath me. Mike! No answer. The air in the house was thick, like it hadn't been touched in hours. I walked through the living room, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, but I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. I could hear my own footsteps echoing in the stillness. That's when I found it. On the coffee table, there was a note. Plain white paper, just like the one left at my door. You should have come at midnight. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard a loud thump from the basement. My heart skipped a beat. Mike didn't have a basement, or at least, I didn't think he did. But the sound came again. Thump. It was coming from beneath me, like something or someone was down there trying to get out. I stood there, staring at the note on the coffee table, my mind racing. The words blurred as a wave of dread washed over me. That sound, thump, was still echoing in my ears. But like I said, Mike didn't have a basement, or at least I didn't think he did. I'd been to his house 100 times, and not once had he mentioned it. So why was there someone, moving down there? My throat was dry, and my hands were shaking. Part of me wanted to bolt out of there and never look back. But something about this whole situation felt like a trap. Everything, the emails, the van, the knocks, and now Mike's cryptic call. It all connected in a way I couldn't yet understand. And if I left now, I might never find out what happened to Mike. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number again. I wasn't even surprised when it went straight to voicemail. I was alone. Another thump. This time louder, closer. Against my better judgment, I started moving toward the basement door. It was tucked away in the corner of the kitchen, almost hidden, like it wasn't meant to be found. The wood was old and worn, and I could see scratch marks near the handle, like someone had been clawing at it. I grabbed the doorknob, expecting it to be locked, but it wasn't. It turned easily in my hand, creaking as I pulled the door open. A blast of cold, damp air hit me in the face, making me gag slightly. The smell was strange, like wet earth and something else I couldn't quite place. Something metallic. My heart was pounding in my chest as I fumbled for the light switch. When I found it, nothing happened. Of course, I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight to shine down the staircase. The light barely cut through the darkness, only illuminating the first few steps. Beyond that, it was just black. Pitch black. "Mike?" My voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "You down there, man?" Silence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew something was down there. I could feel it, watching, waiting. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the first stair. The wood groaned beneath my weight, and for a moment, I thought the whole thing might collapse under me. But it held. I took another step, then another, each one slower than the last. As I descended into the darkness, my phone light flickered. I stopped, holding my breath, and stared at the screen. It flickered again, like something was interfering with the signal. I held it out in front of me, trying to push the beam further into the blackness, but it didn't help. The light was dimming, fast. I was about halfway down when I heard it. A voice. Low, garbled, like someone trying to talk through water. It was coming from the bottom of the stairs. I froze. My foot hovered over the next step, and for a second, I thought about turning back. But something inside me, whether it was curiosity or stupidity, I couldn't tell, pushed me forward. I took another step, and then another. The voice grew louder, more distinct, but I still couldn't make out what it was saying. Then I hit the bottom. My phone's light barely illuminated the floor, which was dirt, not concrete, like a cellar that had been long forgotten. I swept the light around, trying to get a sense of where I was. There were old wooden beams holding up the ceiling, but beyond that, I couldn't see much, but I could hear breathing, slow, labored breathing, coming from just a few feet away. I turned the light toward the sound and almost dropped my phone. In the far corner of the room, there was someone. A figure crouched in the shadows, facing away from me. Their clothes were dirty, torn, and their hair hung in greasy strands over their face. I couldn't see much else, but I knew it wasn't Mike. This person was too small, too thin, almost skeletal, and that breathing, it sounded wrong, ragged, like every breath hurt. I stepped back, trying not to make any noise, but the floor creaked beneath me. The figure shifted. Slowly, it began to turn, its movements jerky, unnatural. I held my breath, praying that the light would hold out just a little longer. When it finally turned to face me, I could barely comprehend what I was looking at. It wasn't a person, at least not anymore. The thing's face was pale, almost gray, with deep sunken eyes that stared through me. Its mouth hung open, lips cracked and dry, but no sound came out. Just that horrible, rasping breath. The skin around its mouth was pulled back, stretched unnaturally tight, revealing yellowed, jagged teeth. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body was frozen in place, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. The thing took a step toward me, its bare feet scraping against the dirt. And that's when my phone died. The light blinked out, plunging me into complete darkness. I felt my heart slam against my chest, and my instincts finally kicked in. I spun around, bolting up the stairs 2 at a time. The thing behind me moved fast, faster than it had any right to. I could hear its feet dragging across the dirt, scrambling to catch up. I hit the top step and slammed the door shut behind me, throwing the bolt across just as something crashed into the wood from the other side. I stumbled back, gasping for air, waiting for the door to burst open, but it didn't. Everything went quiet again. No more scratching, no more thumping, just silence. I backed away, my hands trembling. Whatever was down there, it wasn't human, and it sure as hell wasn't Mike. I fumbled for my phone, hoping I could get it to turn back on, but the screen stayed black. Dead. That's when I heard it, from the living room. A voice, clear as day. "Why didn't you come at midnight?" My blood ran cold. It was Mike's voice, but it wasn't coming from the basement. It was coming from upstairs. I turned slowly, my eyes fixed on the staircase leading to the second floor. I could see a shadow at the top of the stairs. Someone or something was standing there, just out of reach of the moonlight coming through the window. The voice called out again, softer this time. "Why didn't you come?" I didn't wait to find out what it was. I ran out the front door, down the driveway, and into my car. My hands were shaking so bad, it took me 3 tries to get the keys in the ignition. But once the engine roared to life, I floored it. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I don't know how long I drove that night. The roads were dark, empty, and unfamiliar, but I didn't care. My only thought was getting as far away from Mike's house as possible. The image of that thing in the basement, the voice calling from upstairs, it was burned into my mind. Whatever was happening, I wanted no part of it. I pulled into a gas station somewhere outside of town, heart still pounding, hands trembling on the wheel. The lights were harsh, flickering like they hadn't been changed in years. It felt like they were the only thing separating me from the darkness beyond. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, trying to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. But then my phone buzzed. It shouldn't have. The battery was dead, or at least it had been when I left Mike's. But there it was, lighting up the dark interior of my car, a new message on the screen. It was from Mike. "Where are you?" My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar dread crawl up my spine. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I hadn't even known myself. I should have ignored it. I should have blocked the number, thrown the phone out the window, anything. But I couldn't. I opened the message, hands shaking as I typed back. "What happened to you, Mike? What was in your house?" I waited, the seconds dragging on like hours. The gas station was empty, eerily quiet, and the flickering lights cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement. Then my phone buzzed again. "It's too late. You should have come at midnight." My blood ran cold. I looked around, scanning the dark, deserted lot, expecting to see something or someone waiting in the shadows, but everything was still, dead quiet. I tried to think rationally, to tell myself this was just some messed up prank. Mike had to be behind this, right? Maybe he was trying to scare me. Maybe all of this was just a sick joke that had gone way too far. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I tried calling Mike again, desperate for some kind of explanation, but the call wouldn't go through, just static on the other end. That's when I noticed something strange on my screen. My location was being tracked. The little GPS dot was moving, heading straight toward where I was parked. Someone, or something, was following me. Panic hit me like a freight train. I fumbled with the keys, starting the car again, and peeled out of the gas station lot without a second thought. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I needed to get away, as far away as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, that feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. It was like the shadows were clinging to the car, wrapping themselves around me, suffocating me. As I sped down the highway, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. I almost didn't want to look, but something inside me couldn't resist. I glanced down, just for a second, and what I saw nearly made me swerve off the road. It was me. The picture was of me, sitting in my car, staring at my phone. The exact moment I had looked down to read the message, but the photo wasn't taken from inside the car. It was taken from the road, outside, like someone was standing right there, watching me through the windshield. My breath hitched. I hit the gas, speeding down the highway, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The darkness stretched endlessly behind me, but there was nothing there. No headlights, no cars, just that suffocating void. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. It was a small place, just a few blocks of old buildings and quiet streets. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, needing to be somewhere, anywhere, that felt normal. The neon lights of the diner flickered weakly, casting a soft glow across the lot. It felt safer than the road, at least. Inside, the diner was almost empty. Just a tired-looking waitress behind the counter and an old man sipping coffee in the corner. I sat in the farthest booth, trying to calm down, my hands still shaking from the drive. I couldn't stop thinking about that picture, about the way it had been taken, the timing, the angle. It was impossible. No one could have been there. And yet, the proof was right on my phone. The waitress came over, asking if I wanted coffee. I barely managed to nod. She set the cup down in front of me and gave me a strange look, like she could tell something was wrong, but didn't want to ask. I stared at the steam rising from the cup, trying to make sense of everything, but my mind was racing in 100 different directions. Then, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I knew it would be something worse, something I wasn't ready for, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked up the phone and opened the message. "Look behind you." My stomach dropped. I froze, my fingers gripping the edge of the table. Slowly, so slowly, I turned my head towards the diner window behind me. The glass was fogged up from the cold, but through the haze, I could see a figure standing just outside. It was tall, wearing a dark coat, and its face was obscured by the reflection of the neon lights, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I whipped around in my seat, my heart racing, but by the time I turned back, the figure was gone. The window was empty, just a reflection of the empty street outside. I stood up, heart hammering in my chest, and rushed to the door, ignoring the waitress's confused calls. I pushed through the diner door and stepped out into the night, looking left, then right, scanning the parking lot. Nothing. The street was empty. No cars, no people. Just that same suffocating quiet. I stepped back, breathing heavily, when I noticed something on the ground near my car. A small black envelope, identical to the one that had been left at my house. I could barely bring myself to pick it up, but I had to know. I had to see what it said. Inside was another note, just like the others. "It's not over." I dropped the letter and ran back to my car, my pulse pounding in my ears. Whatever this was, whoever they weren't done with me. not even close. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that gnawing, twisting sense of dread. I should have died 10 years ago. I know that now. But somehow, by some twisted miracle, a dark web murderer saved my life. And I have a feeling they're not finished with me yet. I played a game on the dark web. You are going to notice a woman in your home. You must ignore her. The game was real. Okay, so I know this is going to sound like one of those creepy stories you hear on the internet. And trust me, I was skeptical at first too. I mean, who wouldn't be? The deep web. It's been done to death, right? But after what happened to me last week, I feel like I need to write this out, if only to get it off my chest. A little background about me. I'm just your average guy. I'm not a tech genius, not some hacker sitting behind 6 screens with green code flashing in front of my eyes. I'm just a regular dude who got curious about the whole deep web thing. I'd heard the stories. Illegal marketplaces, weird videos, red rooms. But I always thought it was exaggerated, like urban legends for the digital age. I wasn't trying to get into anything too weird. I wasn't hunting down hitman for hire services or anything. I was mostly just browsing, trying to see if the stories were true. The process itself wasn't that hard. Just download Tor, use a VPN, and suddenly I was in this strange corner of the internet where websites didn't have normal names, but instead these random jumbled .onion URLs. That's where I stumbled on this one site. It didn't have a flashy name or some creepy logo. In fact, it looked almost like a simple forum, like something from the early 2000s. The kind of site where you'd expect to see conspiracy theories about lizard people. I was about to click off when I noticed a thread titled, "The Game." There was something about it that pulled me in. I guess it was the description, simple but intriguing. If you're brave enough, you can play. The rules are simple, but once you start, there's no going back. Yeah, I know. Dumb, right? But I was in that late night. Nothing good ever happens after 2 a.m. kind of mood. My curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it. The thread had dozens of replies, but what really stuck out to me was the original post. It was just a couple of lines. Play the game. If you win, you'll be rewarded. If you lose, well, let's just say you won't be posting here again. And then, underneath that, were the rules. You will notice a woman in your home. You must ignore her. She will try to get your attention. Do not engage. If you acknowledge her in any way, the game is over. I scrolled through the replies. Some people were claiming they played, that it was all just a joke, or nothing happened. But others said weird stuff started happening to them. Flickering lights, strange noises. One guy claimed his roommate woke up to him standing in the hallway in the middle of the night, staring blankly ahead, like he was in a trance. It felt like one of those prank things people do on Reddit. Like, hey, post your phone number and see what happens. And then you just get spammed with dumb texts. But for whatever reason, I felt like giving it a shot. What could go wrong, right? At the bottom of the thread, there was a link to a downloadable file. No instructions, no setup, just an .exe file. Now, I'm not a total idiot. I know downloading random programs from the dark web is basically asking to get your computer infected with every virus imaginable. But, I don't know. I wasn't thinking straight. I figured I'd download it, open it, and it would just be some cheap jump scare or a troll virus that shut your computer down. So, I clicked it. The download took a few seconds. When it finished, I opened it. The program popped up on my screen, but it wasn't what I was expecting. No graphics, no title screen, nothing. Just a black window with one sentence written in plain white text. You are now playing. I stared at the screen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing changed. There were no pop-ups, no weird glitches, just that one sentence. After a few minutes, I started to feel dumb. I clicked the X in the corner to close the window. It didn't close. I tried again. Still nothing. I tried to open Task Manager, but it wouldn't let me. The program had locked itself on my screen. And then, after a minute or two of fiddling with my mouse, I heard it. A soft knock at my front door. It was quiet at first. So quiet that I thought maybe I imagined it. I live alone, and it was close to 3 a.m., so the idea of someone knocking on my door at this hour was unsettling, to say the least. I sat there staring at my screen, heart starting to beat a little faster. But then the knock came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. I stood up and went to the door, peeking through the peephole. Nothing. My hallway was empty. I slowly backed away from the door, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe it was some drunk guy knocking on the wrong door. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I shook it off, tried to convince myself it was nothing, and sat back down at my computer. But the second I did, another knock came, this time from somewhere inside the house. I froze. It sounded like it came from the wall, just behind my desk. I stared at the spot, heart pounding, trying to listen. For a while, there was silence. No more knocks, no sounds. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then I saw her. She was standing in the hallway, just barely visible from where I sat at my desk. A woman, pale, almost unnaturally pale, with long black hair that fell in uneven strands across her face. She was facing away from me, standing perfectly still. I felt this sudden, sharp panic rise up in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I blinked hard, hoping she would just disappear. But when I opened my eyes, she was still there, standing, motionless. I don't know why, but the rules popped into my head at that moment. You will notice a woman in your home. You must ignore her. I was still staring at her, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to run out of the house, but another part, the part that remembered those stupid rules, told me to stay put, to act like she wasn't there. So, I did. I forced myself to turn away, back to my computer. My hands were trembling, my breathing shallow, but I didn't acknowledge her. I stared straight ahead, trying to focus on anything other than the creeping dread that was settling in my stomach. The program was still open on my screen, the text unchanged. You are now playing. For what felt like hours, I sat there, staring at the screen, refusing to turn around. I wasn't sure if it was fear or the absurdity of the situation that kept me glued to the chair, but I didn't dare move. Every few minutes, I'd catch a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, like she was shifting slightly, just to remind me that she was still there. And then, slowly, the air in the room changed. At first, it was subtle, like a drop in temperature. You know that feeling when you're in a room alone, but you just know someone else is there with you. Your skin prickles, your heartbeat quickens, and you can almost sense the weight of another presence. That's what it felt like. It wasn't just the woman standing there anymore. It was like she was sucking the energy out of the air around her. I couldn't take it anymore. I shot up from my desk, my chair scraping loudly across the floor as I stood. My first instinct was to get the hell out of there, but I knew, the second I acknowledged her, the game would be over. And whatever that meant, I didn't want to find out. I grabbed my phone, figuring I could at least distract myself with something. Maybe call someone, keep my mind off this nightmare. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the screen, scrolling through my contacts, trying to figure out who wouldn't think I was insane for calling at 3 a.m. Before I could dial anyone, though, the screen flickered. Not just the usual flicker you get when your phone lags either. The screen glitched, like old static from a TV, quick bursts of distorted pixels, and then the background changed. My stomach dropped. The wallpaper I had on my phone, just a normal picture of the city skyline, was gone. Instead, the screen showed a grainy black and white image of my hallway. The exact hallway I was standing in. I could see myself on the screen, holding my phone. But that wasn't the worst part. In the image, she was standing closer. Way closer. She was no longer in the distant part of the hallway, like I remembered. No, in the picture, she was right behind me. I could almost feel her breath on my neck. I froze. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't turn around. My body was paralyzed with the kind of fear you only hear about in nightmares. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to throw open the door and sprint outside. But my mind was locked in a panic loop, replaying the rules over and over again in my head. Do not acknowledge her. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to keep my eyes forward, and slowly, carefully, I backed into my bedroom. The hallway seemed to stretch longer the further I went, my footsteps sounding too loud in the suffocating silence of the house. I could almost feel her watching me, even though I hadn't looked at her directly since she first appeared. The second I crossed the threshold into my room, I slammed the door shut behind me. My hands were slick with sweat as I locked it, pressing my back against the door. My bedroom felt like the only safe place in the entire house, and I desperately hoped that shutting the door would keep her out. But even then, deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. I could still feel her presence, like a cold spot just outside the door. It was like she had followed me without moving, just there, always there. I sat on my bed, pulling my knees up to my chest, like a kid who just had the worst nightmare of their life. My phone was still in my hand, and when I looked down at the screen, the image had changed again. This time, it was a text, a single message, written in that same plain white font. You are not alone. My chest tightened. It felt like something was squeezing the air out of my lungs. This wasn't just some joke, some game. I didn't know what I'd gotten myself into, but I knew I couldn't handle it. I wanted out. Now I forced myself to scroll through my phone, frantically searching for anything that might help. I tried texting a couple of friends, but none of my messages went through. I tried calling, but each call would drop instantly the moment I pressed dial. And then the knocks started again. This time, they weren't soft. They were slow, deliberate. A knock, then a pause, then another knock. It was as if someone, or something, was deliberately trying to test my patience, like they knew the sound alone would eat away at my nerves. I wanted to scream, wanted to shout for help, but I knew it wouldn't matter. No one was coming, and even if they did, how could I explain this? How could I make sense of the fact that there was a woman in my house who wasn't really a woman, and that I was apparently playing some demented version of hide and seek, where I couldn't even acknowledge her? And then, as if the universe was intent on screwing with me further, I heard a faint voice. It was almost a whisper, muffled by the door, but unmistakably hers. "Let me in." 3 words. 3 soft, eerie words that sent a shiver down my spine. My throat tightened, my pulse racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing her to go away. This couldn't be happening. I must have dozed off at my desk, or maybe I was having some kind of lucid nightmare, something that felt too real but would disappear the second I woke up. But then the knocking started again, this time louder, more insistent. "Let me in." Her voice was clearer now, like she was standing right on the other side of the door, just inches away from where I sat. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes, my breath hitching in my throat. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. The tension was unbearable. Every second that passed, every knock that echoed in my room, chipped away at my sanity. It was like she knew exactly how close I was to breaking. The voice came again, but this time it wasn't soft. "Let me in." It was louder, sharper, less of a request, more of a demand. I could feel the pressure building inside me, my brain frantically searching for a way out. How do you survive something you don't understand? How do you ignore something that refuses to be ignored? The knock stopped. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but silence. I almost allowed myself to breathe, to relax, until I heard the floorboards outside the door creak. I wasn't alone. She was waiting, right outside my door. I sat there, back against the door, barely breathing. The creaking outside stopped, but I knew she was still there, right on the other side, waiting. I could feel her presence pressing against the door, like she was trying to seep through the cracks in the wood. Every fiber of my being told me to open that door, to just check, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. I stared at the ceiling, trying to ground myself in something, anything that wasn't her. The air felt thick, like it had a weight to it, heavy with her presence. The longer I sat there, the more unbearable it became. My skin was crawling, every nerve on edge. My brain was screaming at me to run. But where? Where the hell would I go? Outside, into the street at 3 a.m, where she could be lurking in the shadows. There was no escape. This was my house, my sanctuary, and now it felt like I was trapped in a cage with something I couldn't fight or even look at. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. I jumped, startled by the sudden vibration, and glanced down at the screen. A new message had appeared. "You're doing well. She's getting closer." I felt a cold chill sweep over me. What did that even mean? Closer? She was already right outside my door. How much closer could she get? My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. The knock, the voice, the footsteps. They were all building up to something, but I had no idea what. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to know what happened if she got through that door. I stood up, legs trembling like they were made of jelly, and moved toward my bed. Maybe if I hid, if I made myself as small and invisible as possible, she'd leave me alone. It was stupid, I know. Hiding under your covers is for kids, but when you're in a situation like this, you'll do anything to feel safe, no matter how ridiculous. I slid under the blankets, curling into a ball, clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline. The weight of the silence was suffocating, the air so thick I could almost taste it. My mind started racing, trying to make sense of everything. Maybe this was all just some elaborate prank. Maybe the program I downloaded was triggering hallucinations, messing with my head. But that didn't explain the knocks, the voice, or the fact that I wasn't alone. I checked my phone again, scrolling through the endless chain of texts that wouldn't send. Each one sat there, useless, a little reminder of how isolated I was. No one was coming to help. No one was going to save me from this nightmare. I lay there for what felt like hours, clutching the blankets to my chin, trying to block everything out. The silence, the fear, her. But then, the door handle rattled. Just once. It was a soft, deliberate sound, almost like someone testing the lock. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The handle rattled again, more insistent this time. My eyes were wide open, staring at the door through the darkness. The light from my phone cast faint shadows on the walls, and in that moment, I wished I hadn't left it on. It felt like even the smallest bit of light might attract her attention. Then I heard her voice again, closer than before. "Let me in." No more knocking, no more soft whispers. It was a low, guttural voice that was both calm and threatening at the same time. The sound of it made my stomach twist into knots. Ignore her. Don't engage. But how long could I keep that up? The handle rattled harder now, as if she was losing patience. It was a relentless sound, metal clicking against metal in the stillness of the room. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but it didn't help. The noise seemed to echo inside my head. Then, just when I thought the door would burst open, the rattling stopped. I waited, barely daring to breathe, listening for any sign of her. The air was deathly quiet again, but this time it wasn't comforting. It was the kind of quiet that feels wrong, like the calm before a storm. I was about to let out a breath when my phone buzzed again. I almost didn't want to look at it, but my hands moved on their own, flipping the screen toward me. She's inside now. My blood ran cold. My eyes darted to the door, still shut, still locked. There was no way. It was impossible. But the message was clear. Somehow, she had gotten in. I didn't know how. I didn't want to know how. But the second I read those words, I felt it. The change. The air around me thickened, almost humming with her presence. She wasn't just outside my door anymore. She was in here, in the room with me. I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse racing. My body was telling me to move, to do something, but the rules kept repeating in my mind like a broken record. Ignore her. Do not engage. I heard the faintest creak of floorboards, like someone stepping carefully across the room. She was moving slowly, deliberately, like she was stalking me, waiting for me to crack. My breath hitched in my throat as I heard her footsteps grow closer and closer. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in on me. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't. If I opened them, if I looked at her, the game would be over. But the thing is, I didn't know how much longer I could last. I heard another soft creak, this time right next to the bed. She was standing there. She was so close, I could feel the air around her shifting, a cold, unnatural chill radiating off her. I was losing it. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my muscles were locked in place, frozen by the kind of fear that makes you feel like your body isn't even your own anymore. Then I felt something. The mattress. It dipped slightly, like someone was pressing a hand down on it. She was right beside me. My phone buzzed one more time. With trembling hands, I raised it to my face, squinting through the tears that had started to blur my vision. I didn't want to see what the message said. I didn't want confirmation of what I already knew. But I read it anyway. Don't turn around. That was it. That was the last message I received. My breath caught in my throat, and my body went numb. I could hear her breathing now, low and raspy, so close that it felt like she was leaning over me. The mattress dipped again, this time deeper, like she was sitting at the edge of the bed, waiting. My mind was racing. My heart was threatening to explode. I wanted to scream, to bolt out of the room, but I couldn't move. All I could do was lie there, eyes squeezed shut, clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline, while she sat there in the darkness, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to turn around. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed under the blankets, trying to keep my mind from snapping. Time didn't feel real anymore. It was like I was stuck in this endless loop of terror, every second stretching out longer than it should. The room was dead silent, except for the soft sound of her breathing. It was slow, steady, almost rhythmic, and I couldn't block it out no matter how hard I tried. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, curled up into a ball, and prayed it would stop. But it didn't. She was still there. I kept repeating the rules in my head over and over like a mantra. Ignore her. Do not engage. Don't turn around. But it wasn't working anymore. The fear was too strong, too overwhelming. My mind was unraveling, and I could feel it slipping away, piece by piece. It was like she was feeding off it, growing stronger the more terrified I became. I could feel her on the bed next to me, sitting so still it was unnatural. The weight of her presence was crushing, like the air in the room had thickened to the point where it was hard to breathe. Every now and then, I'd hear a faint rustle, like she was shifting her position slightly, but she never moved far. And then, she spoke again. "Look at me." The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, sharp, like the crack of ice breaking in the dead of winter. It cut through the silence, making my entire body tense up. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood, trying to stop myself from screaming. Ignore her. I stayed perfectly still, trying not to react, even as the fear clawed at my insides. My mind was running in circles, desperate for a way out, but there was nothing I could do. I was trapped. There was no escaping her, no outrunning whatever was happening to me. And then the whisper came again, closer this time. "Look, address me." The words were drawn out, dripping with something dark and malevolent. It was like she was toying with me, pushing me closer and closer to the edge. I could almost feel her breath against my skin, cold and unnatural. I couldn't take it anymore. My body was screaming at me to react, to run, to do something. But all I could do was lie there, curled up under the blankets like a scared little kid, hoping that if I just held on long enough, it would be over. But she wasn't done with me yet. The bed shifted again, the weight of her presence growing heavier. I heard the creak of the mattress as she leaned closer, her voice so close to my ear now that I could almost feel the vibrations. "You're going to lose." I flinched. I couldn't help it. The words cut through me like a knife, and for a brief second I almost turned my head. I almost looked, but I didn't. Somehow I held on, my entire body locked in place, every muscle tense to the breaking point. I couldn't let her win. I wouldn't let her win. But the pressure was getting worse. It was like there was a weight pressing down on me, squeezing the air out of my lungs, making it harder and harder to think. The more I resisted, the stronger she seemed to get, and I didn't know how much longer I could last. And then, out of nowhere, the air in the room changed again. It was subtle at first, like a shift in the atmosphere. The room got even colder, and the air felt heavier, thicker, like I was suddenly submerged in freezing water. I could feel something building in the room, something dark and oppressive. It was as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for whatever was coming next. I heard another soft creak, followed by the faint sound of something sliding across the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew what it was. She was moving again, slowly, deliberately. I felt the blanket tug slightly, like it was being pulled, just a little. It was gentle at first, almost imperceptible, but then it became more deliberate, like she was testing me, seeing how far she could push. Before I broke, I clutched the edges of the blanket tighter, pulling it over my head like it was some kind of shield. I knew it was pointless. This wasn't some childhood nightmare where hiding under the covers would keep you safe, but it was all I had. The blanket shifted again, this time more forcefully. I could feel her tugging at it, pulling it down inch by inch. My heart was hammering in my chest, each beat louder than the last. I was so close to losing it, so close to turning around, to seeing what was sitting on the edge of my bed, just inches away from me. But I didn't. Instead, I lay there, waiting, praying for something, anything, to save me from whatever this was. And then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed again. I had almost forgotten I was holding it. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely see the screen, but I forced myself to look. Another message. "She's inside your head." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The words seemed to pulse on the screen, like they were alive. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, but the more I stared at the message, the more I felt the walls closing in around me. She wasn't just in my house anymore. She wasn't just sitting on the bed next to me. She was in me. I could feel her now, like a cold shadow creeping through my mind, whispering in the dark corners of my thoughts. Her voice, soft but insistent, kept repeating the same thing over and over again. "Look at me. Look at me." I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block her out, but it was no use. She was inside, clawing at my mind, breaking down the last bits of resistance I had left. I was losing control, slipping further into the abyss, and I didn't know how to stop it. My phone buzzed one last time. With trembling fingers, I lifted it, knowing it wouldn't be good, knowing it would only make things worse. The message was short, simple, but it shattered what was left of my sanity. "It's almost over. Just look." The words sent a chill down my spine. I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me, dragging me closer to the edge. My mind was screaming, begging me to look, to end this nightmare once and for all. I couldn't resist anymore. My body was trembling, my vision blurring, my thoughts unraveling. It was like she had burrowed deep into my brain, taking control of me, twisting my thoughts until they weren't my own. And I realized, with a sinking sense of dread, that I was going to lose. I was going to turn around. I was on the edge of breaking. My heart raced so fast, I thought it might burst, and my body was frozen, trapped between terror and the irresistible pull to turn around. My thoughts weren't even my own anymore. They were hers. It was like she had wrapped her icy fingers around my mind and was slowly, steadily squeezing. The room was suffocating. I could barely breathe, and her presence felt like it was pressing down on me from every direction. I couldn't see her, but I didn't need to. I felt her in every shadow, in every flicker of the dim light. The air was thick with her. "Look at me." The whisper wasn't just in the room now. It was inside my head, No longer just words floating in the air, but a voice clawing at the edges of my mind, twisting everything until it was all I could think about. I clenched my jaw, trying to resist, but the temptation to just look was getting stronger by the second. The phone in my hand buzzed again, another message. I didn't even want to read it, but my thumb moved on its own, unlocking the screen. This time, there was no message, just a video. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the play button. Part of me knew it was a mistake, but I couldn't help it. I was too far gone, too deep into whatever sick game this was. My curiosity, the same thing that had dragged me into this nightmare, was winning out. I pressed play. The screen flickered, and the grainy black and white footage appeared. It was a live feed of my bedroom, my exact room, from an angle I couldn't quite place, like it was being filmed from inside the walls. I could see myself, lying under the blankets, clutching my phone like it was the last thing tethering me to reality. But that wasn't all. She was there too. I couldn't see her clearly at first, just a vague shape standing in the corner of the room, her face obscured by shadow. But as the video played, she started to move, slow, deliberate steps toward me, closer and closer. I was watching myself in real time, watching her inch toward the bed where I lay. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I wanted to shut off the video, to throw my phone across the room, but I couldn't. I was trapped, watching the inevitable unfold. She was right next to me now, standing beside the bed, her face still hidden. My body in the video was motionless, just like I was in real life, paralyzed by fear, by her. And then, in the video, she reached out. Her hand, pale and skeletal, hovered just above my head, fingers curling like claws. She leaned in closer, her face still hidden in the dark, but I could feel her breath. Even through the video, I could feel her, like she was reaching through the screen and into my mind. Then suddenly, she turned. Not in the video, no. The video froze, the image flickering like static, but in real life. I heard it, a shift, a scrape. She had turned to face me. I didn't have to look to know. I could feel her gaze, burning into me, even though I still had my eyes shut tight. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and my hands clenched the blanket so hard, my knuckles turned white. She was waiting. She was right there, and she wanted me to turn around. I could hear her moving, slow footsteps that circled the bed, closer and closer. Every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt of terror through my body. I had held out for so long, but now, with her standing so close, with the rules and the fear and her whispers consuming every part of my brain, I didn't know how much longer I could take it. The weight on the bed shifted again, the mattress dipping as she moved even closer. Her cold breath brushed against the back of my neck, and I could feel her inches away from me now, waiting for me to finally break. And I almost did. I was on the verge of giving in, of turning around and ending it, when something changed. The house, which had been dead silent apart from her movements, suddenly shifted. A creak in the hallway, the distant hum of the fridge kicking on in the kitchen, the faintest sound of traffic outside. Normal sounds, the kind of sounds that shouldn't exist in the middle of a nightmare. I blinked. My body was still shaking, my heart still racing, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was like a cold fog had lifted just slightly, allowing reality to creep back in. I didn't dare move, didn't dare even breathe too loudly, but something told me that this was my chance, my one shot to survive this. My phone buzzed in my hand again. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see what it had to say. But, against my better judgment, I opened my eyes just a sliver and glanced down at the screen. The message was simple, just 2 words. Don't listen. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. Don't listen. To what? To her? To the voice that had been tormenting me for hours, urging me to look? Or was it something else entirely? But I didn't have time to think. The footsteps stopped. The room grew still again, and I just knew, that this was it, the final moment. She was inches away, leaning over me, her presence suffocating, but I couldn't listen. I couldn't give in. Look at me, she whispered again, her voice so soft, so close, it sent shivers down my spine. I bit my lip, squeezed my eyes shut even tighter, and refused to listen. The air around me grew colder. The pressure in the room intensified. I could feel her frustration, her anger, building with every second I didn't turn. Look, address me. The voice was no longer calm. It was sharp, filled with malice, with a hunger that clawed at my mind. But I held on. I didn't listen. For a moment, it felt like the world itself was about to crack open. The pressure, the cold, the fear. It was all too much. But then, it stopped. Just like that, the air shifted again. The weight lifted. The room felt normal. I didn't dare open my eyes, not yet. I stayed still, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for the next move. But there was nothing. No sound. No presence. Just the quiet hum of the house, returning to its usual state. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. She was gone. The room was empty. The bed was just a bed again. The oppressive cold that had filled the air was gone, replaced by the faint warmth of the early morning light creeping in through the curtains. I let out a long, shaky breath and sat up. My entire body felt like it had been through a war. Every muscle sore, my mind exhausted. But it was over. Somehow, I had made it through the night. I glanced down at my phone, half expecting another message, but the screen was blank. Just the standard home screen. No more creepy messages, no more grainy videos. It was like none of it had ever happened. I stood up, shaky on my legs, and slowly made my way to the bedroom door. I half expected her to be waiting on the other side, but when I opened it, the hallway was empty, silent. Everything was back to normal. But as I stepped into the hallway, something caught my eye. A small piece of paper lying on the floor just outside my bedroom door. I bent down and picked it up, my hand still trembling. There were only 2 words written on it, in the same plain, white font I had seen on my phone all night. You won. That should have been comforting, right? But the second I read those words, I felt something else settle in the pit of my stomach. A lingering dread. Because as much as I wanted to believe it was over, a small part of me knew it wasn't. The game had ended, but something, she, was still out there. And I had a feeling that sooner or later, she would be back.